Welcome to the Dental Team Podcast. I'm your host, Kiera Dent, and I have this crazy idea that maybe I could combine a doctor and a team member's perspective because let's face it, dentistry can be a challenging profession with those two perspectives. I've been a dental assistant, treatment coordinator, scheduler, biller, office manager, regional manager, practice owner, and I have a team of traveling consultants where we have traveled to over 165 different offices coaching teams. Yep, we don't just understand you, we are you. Our mission is to positively impact the world of dental, and I believe that this podcast is the greatest way I can help elevate teams, grow VIP experiences, reduce stress, and create A-teams. Welcome to the Dental Team Podcast. Hello, Dental Team listeners. This is Kiera, and you guys, I am so jazzed to welcome back one of my favorite doctors, an office that we coach, and he just thinks outside the box. If you missed his last podcast where we talked about how to acquire smaller practices into larger ones, purchasing chart audits, and you missed the glass kaleidoscope, you should definitely go listen to it because I 100% Googled glass kaleidoscopes just because I think it sounds so cool. This man is brilliant. He's grown a ton. I'm so proud of him. We worked with him for quite a while. So welcome back to the show, Dr. Dave Moghadam. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, Kiera. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be back.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Well, when we were doing our last podcast, you are somebody that I just admire. One, you're a doctor, so you give a different perspective than I do. Two, you're brilliant. And three, you've got lots of cool topics that I'm excited to share. So I am jazzed. When we were on our last podcast, you came up with a few more. Today, you just came up with another one. Guys, I will tease that one out. It's not today's podcast, but we will do it again. It's going to be ITFU. So I hope you guys are excited for that. I'm excited.
That's the closest I think I could get you to swearing.
It is the closest. But today we're going to kind of dive into team quarterly calibration, which Dave, I will say, is probably one of my top doctors that thinks in systems, but not just thinks, actually executes. And you see massive growth and evolvement of your team. You were one of the offices who literally called me during COVID and said, Kiera, I'm going to train my hygienist. What do you have on hygiene training? And I was like, who are you? Fantastic. We have our hygiene training course. Like, here you go. Try it out. We're beta testing right now anyway. But kind of let's take it away, Dave, on this team quarterly calibration, because it's so needed. And I love that you've actually created a system around it that you've proven to be effective in your practices.
Yeah, for sure. So I got the idea from another office that you work with that's in upstate New York. Wonderful, amazing doctor. Really, really just drives home that aspect of really just thinking outside the box, having a crazy drive, and really just executing. Really has a wonderful team in place there.
Let's be
real.
And
he had a Word document.
He's far away.
Highlight.
Dave, you know he's far away. And I'm going to say this out loud because I know exactly who you're talking about. And I actually mentioned this to another doctor I was talking to today. And I said, let's be real. He's far away and I visit him 4 times a year. Like we're talking opposite coast from me. And I said, and I truthfully do it because this man I think is such a brilliant leader. And I selfishly go to coach them to learn from him. So agreed, like just massive kudos, want to bring this on. And you were mentioning he had a Word document. He's just brilliant. And I'm so jazzed that you took some things that he did and spun it to your own. And I want to point out, everybody listening, take what Dave's going to share. He took it from somebody else. I don't think there's anything wrong in taking items, mimicking them, mirroring them, and recreating them for your practice. So please, 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 like do exactly what Dave did. Take it and shout out to that office in New York. Thanks for paving the way for so many great ideas.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's the best thing. I think when we all go ahead and, take ideas and expand on them and share them back and forth, things really kind of get going. I'm always happy to, help out others in the same way. But at the end of the day, I've tried to explain to people that I've shared, a lot of my systems, my processes, my things with is just because it's good for me doesn't mean that it's going to be good for you. You have to do the work, not because I want you to not, reap the rewards of this, but because it has to fit for your office, and there needs to be some ownership, some authorship from your team and how things work as well. So I mean, taking the concepts and expanding on them and making your own is going to be the key in anything that we're going to talk about today or just in general, really.
Totally agree. And Dave, you just drove home a really, really good point, because I don't think that there actually is a plug and play. I don't think you go to the store, buy a system, come back to your practice and say, okay, let's put it in, put the batteries in, read the instructions. I genuinely think, like you said, it's a concept, it's an idea that then needs to be transformed into your own practice. And I think so many offices get frustrated that they don't see momentum because they literally try to say like, well, this is what Dave did, so take it, move it into my practice and hope that it goes on autopilot. But they don't realize the countless hours you put in to making this work for your practice. So I love, and I hope all you guys heard that, because I'll give you guys systems all day long on this podcast. It's what we do. We come to your practices and do it. Bottom line is there's a reason we don't have an A to Z cookbook as a consulting company. I don't believe it works. I believe you have to customize it to your practice to get momentum.
You can have an outline, because
Totally.
even with making this, I mean, spoiler alert, like I made this, but then 6 months later, a year later, like, you know what? Like, we should probably do this like this. It's a never ending thing. It's just the way that things go. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it's one of those things as you grow and you learn. And the other thing that we'll get to is as your team becomes more comfortable and they start to go ahead and give their input about things, that's when it really kind of starts to hit its stride.
Right. I agree. So we've teased it up enough, guys. So we've got this awesome team quarterly calibration. So Dave, kind of take it away again. And like you said, this is as of today, but I promise you, give Dave 6 months to a year and it will look different. It will be fine tuned again. So I'm excited. Take us away.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is like every office, in starting to create, why you're there, what you're doing, all that stuff. In one way or another, you sit down and you figure out your mission, your vision, your core values, like all these key concepts in, any business. And that was something that we did really early on, as I was actually, it'll be five years ago, probably right about now when this podcast is gonna air. First thing I did is I sat down and we kind of all talked together about what are we going to do? Why are we going to do it? Why are we here? So kind of reviewing those key concepts, and we kind of cycle through, reviewing those things on a weekly basis, but it's a good time to kind of highlight that in the beginning of like, well, why are we here? What are we actually trying to do? Why are we going to make the decisions that we make on a daily basis?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing. The other thing is like, well, what are the practice philosophies? Like, how are we going to treat and plan? Why are we doing things in that way? This kind of stems off of that. And then, we move towards, in discussing things with patients, what's the way we're going to do that? So the key concepts I always kind of bring out is, what do we see? What's going to happen if it's not treated? What are the best options that, we can give somebody? And, why is that better than other options?
Mm-hmm.
So these are always the key points that I want in the back of, our team's mind when we're talking about situations and things that we see. And then other than that, I mean, I think it's two other big topics here. What conditions, are we going to encounter, and, how are we going to discuss those things, and what is treatment planning generally like? And then what makes our office special, really highlighting those things, like talking about these concepts. So this is, even though it was only a few minutes that I just went through that, if we're going to really go through everything in detail here, I mean, it's a couple hours. And I mean, the point I'll get to here is, maybe the first, second, third time, great. But at the end of the day, sometimes it becomes a lot. So you have to kind of eventually figure out ways, well, how are we going to mix things up? Because if you're lucky enough to continue to have the same team there for a long time, you're all going to be sitting there twiddling your thumbs being like, okay, like I get it. Like,
Right.
what's going on?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I think that that's why a lot of people love us, because we'll bring in and shake things up and add some excitement. Because you're right, it can get monotonous and tedious, but that doesn't mean because it becomes monotonous and tedious that we shouldn't continue to do it. Just change how we're doing it, look for ways to innovate it, and make it even better. So if I broke that down, Dave, it sounds like we start with kind of the why. Why are we doing this? What are our core values? Let's assess that, make sure those are aligned, because that's going to be the launch pad, if you will, to the next level. Then it sounds like it was treatment planning, how we're diagnosing things, making sure that's all aligned. And then the third piece would be on what makes us special, what makes us different, what's our wow factor, if you will. And those are kind of the 3 points. And please feel free to add in any gaps that I left out, because I don't know your outline. So I'm learning right along with the listeners right now too.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the basics of it. The one thing that's kind of like a little bit misleading is like with the treatment planning and stuff like that, like what I've done is kind of I've gone off of that doctor's kind of like general template and added more. It's like condition by condition. So maybe like 10, 15, things that you want to list out, and you don't have to, you're never going to hit everything. So you want to kind of get, 80% of what what are we going to encounter on a daily basis? And I think the way to really think about this is the concept that you guys really drive home very well is what would doctor do?
Yep.
That's kind of like, this is like that on steroids. The problem is when you do that like this much, at a certain point, it becomes kind of like tiring. So I think it's nice. We kind of quickly will go through some of this as a review, but I think a way that we could probably improve more is if, let's say, once a month or so, I kind of just did a smattering of, some examples like that to kind of just really freshen things up. And a lot of times, some of these things are like, yeah, these are the cool things that we're doing. But a lot of the pictures, a lot of the things that I share in this section is kind of like, hey, we thought it was going to be like this, but guess what? It's like a bomb went off. Because I think it's very hard for somebody who's not, in the trenches, in a sense, with a lot of these situations to really understand the extent, which is actually helpful. Because rather than, let's say in the hygiene room, like, when we're treatment planning, telling the patient, oh, no problem, it's not going to be a big deal. We kind of say, this is what it looks like in certain situations. We've seen things become like this, just so so setting up that kind of worst case scenario. And that's like one of our, when we talk about like the philosophies that we talk about in the beginning, it's under promise and over deliver.
Right.
We always want to talk about worst case scenario. We want to talk about the fact that, in situations where we think that, further treatment like a root canal may be necessary, that's a discussion even before an appointment is scheduled. That all has to be there. It's nice to be positive and everything, but it's not nice when you do that and then it's a mess later.
Sure. No, you're exactly right. And my mind obviously went into system mode as you were talking, and I'm like, oh, Dave, I got this great idea. Take all your conditions and things that you look at, make them into 12 of them. Then every month on your quick check-in calibrations, you could have all 12 of those. So throughout the year, you go through them. And then each quarter, you highlight maybe the 3 things you've gone over. That was my instant like, hey, this is how you could like keep it on a system, on a regime, or bring case studies every quarter that that you then would take because they've already learned for 3 months, then 6 months and 9 months and 12 months. But I'm curious, and I want to dive into the kind of nitty gritty of it. How do you set up these quarterly calibrations? Because I'm hearing like we want to talk about it, like you mentioned, like this treatment planning, it should be a discussion. But I also have watched, and I know myself, I can sit and listen all day long, but then when I'm asked to repeat or I'm asked to implement or I'm asked to talk about it, I go back to what I know. Even though I just heard it, I might catch 1 or 2 phrases. So do you role play it out? Is it more of a like CE discussion and we all discuss how we're going to discuss, like, kind of walk me through what, and do you block it out for a full day? Is this 1 hour over lunch? Like, how does this kind of look? I feel like I've got a general like outline of it, but then how do you actually execute on this?
Yeah, so we'll block out a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours, depending on the situation. Well, and I've tried a bunch of different ways as far as like a lot of the things that you mentioned. I think the things that are most effective and most effective in general, which, I used to do more so in the beginning, not so much right now, is really just kind of randomly like calling on people and
Amen.
kind of being like, okay, like let's, like, this is the situation, like let's kind of talk it out. And it's a little uncomfortable at first, but it kind of, makes it really get somebody involved in it. Now, what I would do early on is kind of like pretend like you're the doctor. But what I've done to kind of mix it up a lot of times is kind of getting a couple people involved where it's fine. It's whatever their role is in the office, let's say in this situation, sometimes we'll do that or we'll mix it up, but we try and go through the different stages of, let's say, we found this as an emergency patient, let's say.
Yep.
So you're going to be the assistant, you're going to be the doctor, and then you're going to be the front office person. You know what I'm saying? And you kind of, go through that step by step, so we can kind of work on the workflow, like the basically the timeline a patient would go through the office and everything in that. So that has worked well. Honestly, like as I've done this longer and longer, sometimes it's just kind of like it's like going through the motions, and it's just kind of like, okay, you guys know this, let's go through this, and that really hasn't been so effective. So sometimes I'll kind of take a pause and I'll just even hop on Open Dental and think of like, okay, who have I seen like lately where this is, and just open up like the x-rays and kind of do examples like that. I think that's been a little bit more helpful. The hard thing is, I mean, we're all busy. It takes a lot of time to
Sure.
try and go ahead and do all this stuff. But I think if I was able to get a little bit more regimented in mixing it up, but for the purposes of, everybody listening, I think if you get a good, outline together, you get things together, this will afford you, the ability to do this at least a couple times and still be really effective. I
For
believe the
sure.
first handful of times I did it, even though it's like the same kind of thing, it's helpful and you mix in some other stuff, but then it becomes kind of stale after a while. So
Right.
you want to make sure you're bringing new examples or shaking things up, or, just kind of everybody kind of knows like, okay, yeah, we're going to call on you randomly,
Mm-hmm.
pay attention.
Right. No, I love that. And it's funny that you said that because that's actually my trick in offices. People are always impressed that Kiera Dent can learn names very quickly in a practice. And I'm like, guys, the bottom line is the only reason, not the only, but one of the main driving reasons I learn names as soon as I go into a practice is one, people tend to like me a lot more if I remember their name. Two, I believe that if I'm going to ask them to do something, I should at least know their name. And three is when I get to team meeting, you better believe I'm going to impress everyone and dazzle that I know your whole names, but then I'm going to randomly call on every person and they're like, oh, she now knows my name. So I think it's really wise. I was also thinking, Dave, it's fun too to hear your ideas and then also flip into consultant Kiera mode too. And I'm like, gosh, like let's just take this and expand on it. Some fun things for that excitement, that making sure everyone's on their toes is you can actually like have them draw straws. So like here's the case study. Everybody draws straws and it's a doctor, it's a hygienist, it's a treatment coordinator and an assistant. So they all have to draw straws. And so it will, if there's a natural excitement and terror and adrenaline rush real quick of here's the scenario, we're going to role play this all the way through, draw straws of who's going to be who on this scenario. So then it's a constant shake up. I also love the surprise and delight of asking people on the fly, but I really also love like, and I was thinking like some way you could make this pretty simple for you quarterly is if you know that there's a patient that you're working on that you're like, oh, this would be a great example. Maybe have your assistant mark that appointment in red or something.
Mm-hmm.
So that way you are pulling those constantly, which I'm sure you're doing, but thinking of offices of like, how could you be building this up for the next month or two? Just highlight some appointments, bring those to the table. Or I'll be honest, I just did a what would doctor do with a practice the other day. Ironically, it's actually the same office we were talking about earlier. Funny coincidence there.
Mm-hmm.
But I just pulled up some FMXs on Google. Reason I did that was because sometimes if we know the patient, people get weird and they say, oh, but that was Kiera and she's got a funny bite, and they have 1,000 excuses versus just
Right.
a FMX or just intraoral pictures maybe can help them see it. So David, it sounds like you guys, I love also hearing it's 2 to 3 hours. So that's helpful to know. Probably a couple case studies. Love the idea of different people role playing out different parts of that procedure. And I will say,
do you remember so we didn't do straws when you kind of taught us this concept. Do you remember what we did?
I think I just like put like name tags on people. I don't remember
No.
exactly.
So you ran out to, what was it? Like, I don't know, Michael's or like some
It
kind
was
of
the
arts and crafts
snowballs.
store.
Was it the snowballs? Yes.
Yeah. So we did that. We did that one time too. I found them on Amazon and I got just to kind of mix things up. We basically got snowballs and, people would kind of toss to the next person in the line
Clever.
of the patient experience. Yeah.
Clever.
So
yeah.
that's the thing.
Snowballs.
Sometimes you just got to do stuff like that to mix it up, because
For sure.
otherwise, to sit there for more than like half an hour, everybody's either going to fall asleep or, bang their heads against the wall.
Have you guys heard? But like, really, have you heard? And are you the type of person that loves to take massive action? Well, if you are, I would love to invite you to Dentally Team's virtual summit, April 22nd through 23rd. And yes, right now, guys, it's early bird. That means it's $200 off the normal ticket price. You guys are going to learn how to optimize your practice this year. We know it's been a rough year. People have quit. We've had COVID. We've had changes. So we want to teach you guys how to optimize within your practice now and execute. Friday is full team. Saturday is all things leadership. So bring your team, get some CE, take massive action. Head on over to thedentallyteam.com. Coupon code is Summit Early Bird, and it's valid until March 31st. That's Summit Early Bird, all one word, and it's valid until March 31st. So guys, head on over. I can't wait to have you take massive action, optimize your practice, and execute. Let's make 2022 your best year. And I also think it's important, like another way, I remember when I was in practice as an office manager, I got real sick of having to create all of these because it, like you said, it's a lot of time. But also if I'm always the teacher, how can I test my team's knowledge base? So also flipping the role and having some of them come of like, hey, here is the piece of the treatment plan that we want to go through. So maybe it's root canals, maybe it's crowns, maybe it's implants, maybe it's on perio, and have somebody come with how they explain it to also double check their knowledge base. So like set them up like you're going to be presenting on this part, you're going to be teaching this part. I think is also a really fun way to shake it up. Those snowballs, that was funny. It just happened to be what we found at the store. But guys, if you ever want a snowball that actually feels like a snowball, it was actually pretty fun. I do remember that exercise.
Those are pretty good. The ones that I found, not so great.
I think I actually found them. If you want to know, go scope in Christmas time, holiday time. I think it was like Walgreens or like I think that because I had to just run to the store real fast and I was like, oh, these look great. But I love that, Dave. I love that you're getting your team to, I think the big piece that I'm hoping offices are taking away from this is there's consistency in calibration and you have a set time. So every quarter, you know, you're going to calibrate on some topic. We've got the why are we doing this? We've got the whole treatment plan and the procedures that we do in the practice, role playing that out from start to finish. And then also you're doing the what makes us special. I really think that cadence is brilliant. Even though it might feel routine and mundane, I'm like, guess what? Working out is routine and mundane. But the long-term effects of it, when done consistently, are health and wealth and growth and drive. And so, yes, you've got to shake it up. Everybody gets into that workout like suck and it just becomes very boring and you don't want to go work out anymore. So you shake it up. You come up with new routines. You find different trainers. You find different ways to do it. But at the end of the day, you're still working out. Just like here, at the end of the day, you're still calibrating, you're still training. So how does your team feel about this, Dave? Like, do they look forward to it? Do they say like, calibration? Like, how does it tend to go? That's my first question. Then I've got a follow up to that one.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's hard to say. I think it's a mixed bag in a sense. You know, some people have been with me for a really long time, so it can become kind of, you know, a lot at times with stuff like that. I think it's nice to kind of, you know, break up the schedule a little bit though, because a lot, you know, we do have our weekly meetings, but still, you know, they're pretty short now, given that we're not like, we used to like eat while we were doing it. Now we kind of, you know, break that up, you know, based on our protocols and everything like that. So it's like the shorter meetings, but it's nice to have a little bit more time in my mind then. But the other thing too that I wanted to mention is I think the way that I look at things is a little bit different now. So I think it makes it a little bit less intimidating. I think when I kind of first started out with this, it was very much like, this is the script, like you got to say it exactly like this. And I realized that that's insane, for lack of better terms, because really at the end of the day, like the important thing in my mind is like the key concepts are there, that the points are coming across the right way, but it has to sound like Kiera. Right. You know what I'm saying? It has to sound like Dave. It has to sound like an actual person. Like if it sounds like it just like a script, like that defeats the purpose. The point of kind of us doing that is to have some uniformity in the concepts that are coming about, and so it builds trust with the patients. But if something sounds phony, that's the opposite of it. So I've kind of gotten away from a little bit more of like, you need to say this exact word like this, to kind of like, you know, these are like the concepts, and if somebody says things in like a way where it doesn't kind of, you know, do that, it's kind of like, hey, that's great, maybe, you know, this is like the point we're trying to get across, you know, next time try it like this a little bit. But you know, you'd be surprised, just like with a lot of this stuff, you know, sometimes, you know, it really comes across super well the way somebody said something, and it's completely unlike what we have written down, but it's the same idea. It just sounds like them.
Totally. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because again, I'm going to tie back to why I don't believe in an A to Z cookbook. I believe in systems and processes, but I also believe in change, because yesterday I was interviewing a new consultant for Dental 18, and on our collection call protocol, she almost had the exact same style that we did. But she literally said, we do a kind call. So we call the patient in a kind way. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's brilliant, because it just gave this whole new feel to a collections call versus like I'm calling to collect money, and she called it a kind call. So to your point, you can actually find better verbiages, better ways when people do it their own way. But also don't be afraid to tell people if it comes across different because we don't hear ourselves. Dave, you're hearing me. I can think and assume of how it's landing, but you're the one who's ultimately experiencing my words coming out. And so giving people feedback, some I giggle because I've got some team members and like, Kiera, I said it just like you. And I'm like, no, what I said was this. What you said is like that they're stupid and they're incompetent. Like that's how it came across, but they don't realize it. So I've even had certain team members record themselves. And then in a loving way, a very safe space where it's not judgmental, like playing it back. So sometimes even one-on-one, because that way they can actually hear themselves. So maybe even after calibration, you could spice it up this time, Dave, if you want. Have them role play these things and then have each person at least record themselves one time. You can have voice memos on your phone and have them actually listen back to see how it sounds, because oftentimes, like Dave, you and I actually chatted about how it sounded when you heard your podcast played back. You were like, oh, I sound a lot different. And I said, oh, for my first like 150, 200 podcasts, I felt awkward. I still feel awkward, but it's becoming more normal. But we don't hear ourselves as much. So I think like that's also a piece to it of like giving people that autonomy. Also, some things of having them record themselves, I think can help, because then it also helps show knowledge base. And selfishly, I'm also always thinking of systems that actually creates a training bank for future employees, because you've actually got great verbiage, great examples that you can plug in under those certain topics that future hires could actually hear. You could create a really awesome training bank that way as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's wonderful.
So fun. Dave, I love it. So guys, I would say try it out. Try Dave's model. But I'm going to ask real quick, give us like a quick synopsis of like going through the why. Like we dove a lot into the treatment, how to have the role play, all of that. Like what's that why part? Like is it just like a quick synopsis of you kind of reinstating the vision, the core values, reminding people why we're here?
Let me see. Hold on. I'll Okay, so as far as the why, I mean, we talked about mission, vision, core values, and we get to the philosophies of the practice. So the first thing is, we want to break down like what's our mission. So in our office, our mission is to exceed our patients' expectations. So we kind of talk about, well, what does that mean? Like how are we going to do that? We want to provide compassionate and practical dental care. That's the second part. So like, what does that mean to everybody? Really. Mm-hmm. We want to provide outstanding customer service. So once again, like, what does that mean? How do we interact? Are we providing information up front? Are we staying on time and respecting people's time? What amenities we're providing? How are we doing follow-up? All these things. And a lot of this is like, we have it written out, but it's a little bit more of a discussion. And then the other thing too, the last part of our mission at our office is remaining at the forefront of clinical advancement. So that's one of those things where when we first made this up, that was a big lie. Mm-hmm. I mean, everything was like analog paper or whatever, but, then about, a few months in, I got the itch and decided to make some questionable financial decisions and just, go all in on everything, because that's the way that I wanted to practice.
Yeah. So I actually love that you broke that down. I love that because sometimes as leaders, when we build these visions, what we're envisioning is different than what our team actually does. So I love that you break it down. Like, what does excellent customer service actually look like, feel like? What's the experience? Because then it becomes more tangible versus just words on a paper.
Yeah. So that's the first chunk. The second chunk was what we talked about: under promise and over deliver. Mm-hmm. I think that's a big part of it. The third thing is what we kind of talked about of like, how uniformity, builds and maintains trust. And so there's that fine line of like, yeah, we want it to sound similar, but also not like it's cookie cutter and baked.
Right.
And then, a couple other things, like I think pictures really help. So, pictures worth 1,000 words. We want to take good pictures of what we see so we can help explain something really well. And then the last chunk really is, there are different types of treatment. So there's stuff that's, very important, more emergent. There's stuff that's preventative. And then, the more elective, cosmetic category of things. Mm-hmm. So we kind of talk about that. And that helps us, figure out, well, how do we want to, prioritize everything.
Sure.
So that's the first big thing. And we dive into all that, before we go into like how are we going to talk about this?
Yes. Which I actually think is really important. I'm big on sequence matters. And I love that you first go through who are we as a practice? Let's kind of give some tangibles on it, because that actually can spur people to think differently of how they would explain treatment or explain how they're going to talk to a patient on certain things, which I really, really love that you did that. So now looping all the way to the end, Dave, you said you also talk about what makes us special. So what does that
Yeah.
look like on this calibration piece for you?
So basically, this was another exercise we did at some point. It was not one of I didn't feel like if I just kind of sat there and I told people like, oh yeah, like this is why we're great. Like that would be a big waste of time.
Sure. Yeah,
So
agreed.
I really we kind of sat down there and I said like let's just like get into it and just call on everybody and say, well, what do you think makes us stand out? And we kind of just went through and kind of really put together, well, what really sets us apart as an office. What are the things that we try and do. And aside from that, even just some of the basic stuff that a lot of offices have, even, but we want to make sure that we're mentioning like membership plan in your office, or if you do anything like like we do something that a lot of people do, like a whitening for life thing, where it's basically they pay once and as long as they're coming regularly, here you go.
Right.
Stuff like that, just kind of like little things that patients may ask anybody in the office, and would be like, oh yeah, I don't know what that is. Like
Sure.
that would be very like that would be not good. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because it's one of those things. It's always funny. Offices, I giggle a lot when offices tell me, "Yeah, Kiera, I don't know what to do. Our patients, like, we do Invisalign in our practice, but they're still going to someone else." And I'm like, because your patient doesn't know. Like, if they don't know all these things that you guys do, they will go somewhere else. They think you do their cleanings and you do their fillings. They don't realize that you do implants and ortho and sedation and Botox and all these other things. So I love that you constantly remind your team of what makes your office special, because in doing so, that's then what they're going to translate to the patients. It's like, I heard a great quote that said, repetition is the mother of skill. And I love that, because we can talk about it one time, but if we're constantly repeating it, like, why do we get so good at our morning routines? Well, because we repeat it every single day, to where it's second nature for us. We don't even have to think about it. So I really love that you dive through the whole practice in a quick 2 to 3 hour thing. I love that it doesn't take all day. I love that it breaks and shakes it up, pre-scheduled out, because this calibration is paramount. And I'm like, shoot, Dave, I'm going to go back and listen to this podcast. I'm going to write these things down, because I was thinking of consultant calibration. I have one once a month, but we don't go through the nitty gritties of everything as consultant teams. And I've been watching, as I've been doing client check-ins, that each consultant kind of has their own variants from office to office. If we could start to bring those in, hear what the other people are saying, how they're saying it, similar to doctors, if doctors could hear how different doctors are diagnosing, different ways that they're explaining treatment, it helps elevate your entire practice and patient experience. And I think at the end of the day, that's what this ultimately is all about. Because if your patient experience is awesome, coming from an awesome team experience, the whole practice is just going to elevate and everyone's going to feel much happier, less stressed, and all around great.
sure. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so all this stuff is helpful. I mean, the take home message is it can get stale, so it always requires time and effort to try and mix it up, and that's always hard to be able to do. But you do what you can, and really at the end of the day, I mean, the more you can do with this stuff, the better. The other thing that you were talking about, how our patients don't really know what we do and everything like that. I mean, I can't preach that enough. I mean, I think there are things that we can do way better to do that. Simple thing that we did is we, for a long time, had like spear education videos looping in our waiting area.
Mm-hmm.
And it just really opened my eyes to the fact, like sometimes like patient would come in and be like, oh, I saw that video about that. Let's do that. And, oh my God, like this is amazing, So what I'm working on right now is I try and put together basically like a little slideshow in the background. That part of it will be kind of things as far as some of the clinical things that we do. Part of it will be like getting to know team members better. So like little fun facts, things like that, other things that just like, somebody may see in the background and find interesting, kind of like a little subliminal in a sense, but we want to try and find a balance where it's not like so in your face. But the important thing there is really people see this and they may not necessarily, need the treatment or have the conditions that they see on the screen, but, husband, wife, mother, daughter, who knows? And they may say, hey, you know what? I saw this at my dentist, and the way that they do this looks pretty amazing. I've never like seen or heard of anything like that when they, it seems like it was so much more involved. So
Totally.
that's a little project we have working on. And it's a little project that I personally am not dealing with, which I'm very, very happy about. So we're slowly getting everybody to help out.
That's awesome. Well, and like you said, I think it's just an awareness piece. I think the more your patients can see it, because guys, I don't need implants, thankfully. My teeth are really straight. I hate my ding dang lateral number 10. If somebody wants to, take me on as a patient, it just needs a quick rotation. That's all I need. But nobody ever asks me about it. But and Dave, I'm sure on Zoom right now is like looking at like, here, let me see your tooth. But the bottom line is, like, it's an awareness piece. Just because I don't need it as a patient, I am connected to a lot of friends and family. So if I hear it at work or I hear it with my family and they're like, oh, I need somebody to do ortho, I'm like, oh, my dentist does that. So again, it's just an awareness piece for your patients. So Dave, so many pieces you pulled in here. I love going through the why, actually going through the pieces of your practice, then going into the tangibles of clinical, having case studies, examples, having people role play it out on different positions, and then going into what makes us special and reminding our practice of the things that we do offer. So it's a constant awareness. And I love that you have this on a quarterly cadence. I think for all offices, I don't care how you do this, if it's once a year, if it's every 3 months, so 4 times a year, if you do it twice a year at retreats, I don't care, but I would strongly suggest each of you at least try to get this in. We're ending the year out. So I would say at least at a minimum 1 calibration. I would strongly suggest that 4, because again, repetition is the mother of skill that can really help out. So Dave, as always, brilliant podcast. Love learning from you. Love hearing the great things you're doing. It's been fun to watch you evolve as a leader and as an owner and as a clinician over the years that I've known you. So thank you again for your time today. It was just awesome. I loved it.
Same. Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you all for listening. I'll catch you next time on the Dental 18 podcast. And that wraps it up for another episode of the Dental 18 podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.